As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
One of the ways out of the abundance scarcity cycle is an exercise that I invite people to do in the book, which is doing your wealth mandala. Because what that does is that it gives you the ability to look at your life from the perspective of satisfying human needs. And I tell people to do two things. One, look at the needs where you're actually really fulfilled in. Where are you satisfied in your life? And then you look at the needs where you are feeling lack and scarcity.
That was Elizabeth Husserl on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
I'm Yael Schoenbrunn, a clinical psychologist, faculty at Brown University, author of Work, Parent Thrive, and a biweekly newsletter on relationships.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hi, everyone. It's Emily, and I'm here today to introduce an episode with Debbie about money. And it's a topic that I've been really eager to cover on the podcast. And I had the opportunity to interview Elizabeth Husserl about her new book, The Power of Enough, Finding Joy in Your Relationship with Money. And first off, I absolutely love the title. So Debbie, what were your thoughts on the conversation?
Well, as I told you earlier, I'm really going to have to rein myself in here because I have so many thoughts. And first of all, there are so many messages around money and wealth and our relationship with money. I think as I wrote my burnout book, I really became aware of some of the narratives that, we live in, at least here in the US, in a capitalistic system where there are a lot of narratives about money, and it's very much tied to social status, of course. And I think it can trickle into our lives in some ways that can be very problematic. And I, of course, have my own relationship with money and have had various financial stressors and issues with spending and saving. And I can sometimes have a scarcity mindset around spending money on certain things. And so that was helpful. And I really was thinking about it through the lens of being a therapist. Because I think as a therapist, there are often issues related to money, whether it's financial stress. And I've had clients who have very few financial resources over the years, to like all these complicated things with families and wealth distribution within a family. And I think that it's one of those topics like sex, which we want to be open to talking about in therapy, but sometimes we're almost like trained not to ever talk about it.
Yep. And we get into that, how money is such a taboo topic. I mean, it is like sex or politics, don't talk about it at the dinner table. But that is really harming us because I don't know if I know anyone who has a really healthy relationship with money, if you think about it. I mean, it runs the gamut from kind of being she calls it hoarding. And that's how I would identify as being more of a penny pincher and having that scarcity mindset and just wanting as much money as possible in the bank to feel secure, which is an illusion. And then there's the overspending, right? Just feeling like I don't have control anyways, and it feels good to buy things, but not really thinking ahead or about the future. And so I think the framework that she gives was like a complete paradigm shift for me about how to even think about money. Even in the interview, I felt like I was shifting around, I was approaching it very literally around, I should spend more because I have a scarcity mindset. And it goes so much deeper than that. It really is shifting this culturally normative negative view of money.
I love that she talked about it in that way. And then how can we take this thing that is really just this human construct and turn it into something that we have a healthy relationship with? So to me, this gave me a lot of food for thought. And I think opened up my eyes to the ways in which I may be not even thinking about my own relationship with money and my reactions to things going on in the world related to money. And so I think there's a lot to think about in this conversation.
Yes. And I mentioned how it draws on so much of what we talk about on this podcast and in psychology and how connected money really is. It's, if we think about it, the way she presents it, it's very integrated rather than it's just over here. And then we live our lives of purpose and meaning and finding our sense of self and fulfillment over here. That's not the case. You know, she really presents how we can integrate it all. And that really is kind of finding that healthy way of connecting with money. So there's much more to learn from Elizabeth herself. And I hope people get a lot out of this conversation. Hi, everyone. Since I joined the podcast 1.5 years ago, I have been wanting to do an episode on money. We've touched on the topic in different ways in previous episodes, but I knew when I read the title of this guest's book that she was approaching money how I have been wanting to explore it, by examining our relationship with money, not just focusing on the tangible object of money, but what it represents and how we relate to it in healthy and unhealthy ways. Well, I was not disappointed, so I'm so excited. I'm here with Elizabeth Husserl, author of the new book, The Power of Enough: Finding Joy in Your Relationship with Money. Elizabeth Husserl is a registered investment advisor representative, financial advisor, highly sought after speaker, and co-founder of Peak 360 Wealth Management, a boutique wealth planning firm. She does nonprofit work throughout the Americas and has led workshops at major tech companies, including Airbnb, Unity, and Google. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her husband and daughter. Elizabeth, welcome to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Oh my gosh, I feel tears in my eyes hearing you read that introduction because this is the book I've always wanted to read. So I very much resonate with that sentiment, which is why I wrote it. So thank you for having me.
Well, congratulations. I know it's hot off the presses, brand new in the world. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And I've read other books about money because I do find the topic fascinating, but this was a very different take on a book about money. You have really imbued this topic with everything we discuss on our psychology podcast about well-being and living a life of meaning. You touch on sense of self, belonging, fulfillment, purpose. And I think it's because you are wanting other people to transform how they relate to money and how they think about wealth. So with that said, we have so much to get into to do your ideas justice in our time together. And in alignment with your approach, which is very experiential, I just want you to know that I am willing to talk openly about my own relationship with money and my history, if that helps with illustrating your ideas.
So thank you so much, Emily, for that introduction, because ultimately this book brings together my two passions, economics and finance and spirituality and psychology. You know, people know me as a financial advisor and my degree in economics, but I did go to the California Institute of Integral Studies and I do have a degree in transpersonal psychology. So even though I didn't go through, you know, the thousands of hours to get clinical training, I do have that framework of a wider perspective of our humanity embedded in spirituality. So those have been my passions. And I wrote the book from both angles because I do get to work with clients every day, looking at their spreadsheets and helping them determine, does their anxiety truly pertain to the world of money or does it not? So I feel very fortunate in that, right? I have a lot of therapist friends who are like, people come and always talk to me about their troubles with money, but are they lying to me? Is it true? Is it real? And I get to do work in both worlds where I look at the spreadsheet. I'm like, your spreadsheet tells me a different story than what's coming out of your mouth. Right. And so let's start to dive into that. And so I feel very fortunate because money reveals so much about us. I love this idea of relationship to money because our relationship to money is another doorway of knowing who we are, Emily. And so thank you so much for being willing to potentially share some of your own journey as we go, much like I've shared my journey in the book. The more we share about our journey and our relationship to money, the more we start to normalize it. We give it its right place. I start the book by saying money is a big spiritual teacher and it can actually even become your friend. And the subtitle is finding joy in your relationship to money. So how do we find joy, humor, and play in it? And it starts by rolling up our sleeves and being like, okay, this is a relationship I want to be intentional in instead of living by default because someone taught me this thing or I inherited this belief or I got stuck in this cycle and I don't know how to get out. But we have the capacity and agency to design our relationship to money just like any other relationship in our lives.
That's what I was thinking as I was reading the book is this isn't just about money at all. I mean, this is applying money as sort of an example, but 100%. We have reactivity and automatic responses to everything based on our histories, right?
Yeah.
And money's just no different. Somehow we've separated it out like it is different when it's so much like everything we interact with in our lives and ourselves.
Yeah.
But I do. So speaking of, I want to lay the foundation for how you use the terms differently than what we're used to. So please share your definitions of money and wealth.
Okay. So money is a social technology, right? And so there's different ways that we think about money. It's a currency of exchange. It's a medium of storing value. It's something that we use as credit for future purchases. But in reality, it's a technology, a social technology that allows us to interact with each other. And so it allows us to interact with each other. That's the technological piece as we build societal agreements. And so that's really key because if you start to trace the history of humanity and you go back to more nuclear or communal or villages, right? We lived in closer contact with each other. So there was an element of trust where in some cases we didn't necessarily need to use money because we trusted our interactions. That is different than barter, right? Trusting our interactions doesn't mean that I give you something in exchange for something else, but it's more like, you do something for me, right? I think of when at my time in Oaxaca where they would have these huge celebrations around quinceañeras or Day of the Dead. And some of the people would throw different parties. And there was this trust in the community that resources would be shared and distributed. And it was a currency of flow. When we started to expand beyond those smaller nuclear communities or villages, we didn't have that same level of trust. And so money started to represent something that allowed us to create still currency of exchange. And it was a very simple way, and currency has taken on very different forms, right? We've seen it in terms of beads and shells and cigarettes and all different forms because it's really an object of exchange. That changes shape, which is really important. Mm-hmm. And what's also important is as we started to use money as a currency of exchange, but still connected to its starting threads and trust, it's gotten a little hazier because we start to then feel, oh my gosh, if I don't have money, am I not trustworthy? If I don't have money or a high net worth, is that a reflection of my self-worth? And so a lot of what I bring in the book is this notion of, let's separate money for what it is and what it's not. Mm-hmm. Money can't define you. It is a technology that we can use towards fulfillment of our different human needs, but it can't define you. It is a social technology. Right. And if we use it as such, like any technology, social media, cell phones, etc., there's a shadow to it and there's a light to it. Right. And a lot of times we get stuck in the shadow of it of like, oh my gosh, I hate what money does to people, right? It corrupts people. It's used for evil. But if we start to say, okay, what represents again to the world of money and what corresponds to humans in our relationship to power and influence, then we start to see what's money's right place in it. So that's the definition of money. In terms of the definition of wealth, right? So the wealth in its core epistemological root is connected to well-being, right? So the wealth of well-being, the wealth of wellness, that well. And so the idea of wealth connected to well-being, it becomes more a conversation of how am I channeling resources? And money's a resource, but it's not the only resource. How do I channel resources to create an experience of life where my wealth or the resources that I am accumulating and using and distributing and earning enhance my experience of well-being? And I use that word experience intentionally because what I talk about in the book is how do we embody wealth and not just accumulate it?
Yep.
Because what's happened is that in our society, we try to accumulate it and it feels very abstract and it's on paper and we don't use it because we often like money to go in one direction, which is up.
Yeah.
Right. And exactly.
More.
I want more in my account. Right. And in reality, it's, you know, my grandfather taught me this. He died and he's like, you don't take a penny with you. And it doesn't mean that you also aren't responsible for the loved ones that you leave behind, right? My grandma had to kind of deal with some unfinished business and some things that he didn't necessarily leave her in the best place. But there was truth and you don't take a penny with you. And so what's that right balance of using your resources in the allocation of them to better fulfill all of your human needs so that you can embody wealth? That's a wider definition of wealth than the accumulation of scarce resources, which is what I was taught in economics when I was going through school. So these are very different perspectives. So the definition of wealth, where wealth is connected to well-being, is the opposite of the definition of wealth that most of us are taught, where it's in combination or in relationship to economics, which is the allocation of scarce resources, right? And so that's really important because when we already pivot or situate wealth within the allocation of scarce resources, that puts our body in kind of a flight or flight state where we're like, okay, I don't want scarcity, so I'm going to push that away and try to accumulate as much as I can. And so notice that creates two expressions in the body, the pushing away of scarcity and the grasping and hoarding to wealth as the solution of it.
If you're parenting a child with ADHD, you know the daily battles. Getting out the door on time, homework struggles, constant reminders, and the exhaustion of feeling like you have to do everything for them. What if it didn't have to be that way? This is Emily, and over the past few months, I've worked closely with parents like you, helping them create the right balance of autonomy and structure so their kids step up and actually want to take on more responsibility. That's why I'm launching a small group coaching course in April, specifically for parents of ADHD children. Here's what you'll get: a clear plan to tackle the biggest friction points in your daily routines, proven strategies to support your child's independence without constant reminders, a supportive group of parents who truly get it so you don't have to do this alone, text check-ins between sessions for real-time support and troubleshooting. If you're interested, I'm running a 20% discount for POTC listeners if you schedule the pre-enrollment call before March 27th. Go to my website, emilyedlinphd.com/course, and complete the enrollment form now. Why wait? I can't wait to see you in April. We are going to spend time on the abundance-scarcity cycle because, first of all, I greatly relate to it. But I want to use your own words to sum up this definition of wealth that, like you said, is so counter to especially those of us living in capitalism. It's very counter to the idea of wealth that capitalism promotes, right? And you say wealth is not about having everything, but rather about finding meaning in everything we have. So who would you say this book is for? Like, who are your readers?
Oh my goodness. I'll answer it two ways. On one hand, this book is for everyone. I do believe that the power of fulfillment is a human birthright. The power of enough, the ability to experience fulfillment in our lives is a human birthright that we should all have access to. And I would also say too, we all have a relationship to money. You really do have to be kind of on a stranded island by yourself to not have a relationship to money. So I think there's very practical, tangible tools from a relational perspective. It doesn't necessarily replace a financial literacy, but there's so many good books on financial literacy, right? We still have to learn about the use of money, but this is about our relationship to money. So I would say on one hand, it's for everyone, but I do think it resonates. Like if I were to narrow my readers, I do think it resonates with women, right? Women who feel that there's a different doorway into finance, different doorway into accumulating, experiencing, embodying wealth. And again, notice it's not an exclusive piece. We can do both. We can build wealth from our communities from a financial stability standpoint, but then we can also raise our head and look at wealth from a much more holistic standpoint on how is it satisfying not only my individual needs, but our collective needs. So that resonates a lot with my female clients because we're relational. And a lot of times you're like, oh my gosh, thank you. You're making finances simpler and easier to understand. And I still tell them spreadsheets are important and have a role. But if I can get them excited about their relationship to money, they're less intimidated about going to numbers and analysis and spreadsheets. So, if I were to hone in, a lot of women really appreciate the approach.
Well, I think the approach is so holistic, and that's where you're talking about the integrative piece, where you're tapping into how money is part of who we are and how we live in a way that I think we have been trained to reject. We see it almost as a threat. It could be a threat to who we are. We don't want to lose who we are by chasing money. There's the narrative around, the greedy, wealthy people who are soulless, right? And you get into this about the bad reputation of money, but that really does affect our relationship with money to think of it like that.
100%, Elena. And I would say, oh my goodness, if there's people who are in the world who I would want to have a lot of money, it's the people who are listening to your podcast. And this is really important. My two values in life are depth and wealth. The depth is because I'm just naturally drawn to the, human psyche and all the depths underneath the layers of who we are. And wealth from that perspective of holistic use of resources for our fulfillment. Money is a resource that I include in it. And so over time, what I find, Emily, as we start to kind of create a healthier relationship to money, is that you start to feel like, oh my gosh, money and I can be friends. And money can come in closer. And I figure out a way to kind of keep it close, right? Because if we have this relationship where like, oh my gosh, money is evil or tainted or dirty, I see this hot potato effect happen where it comes in and you're like, I don't know what to do when I push it out. I either overspend it or I stick it in an account and I hoard it, but it's not a healthy relationship. But if we start to create a healthy relationship where we're in flow with money, we know how to call it in. We're very clear with our intentions. I mean, again, as a psychologist, this is like good relational and communication patterns with our partners and our children and our spouses and our family members. It's this same concept because if I have clear communication with money, oh my gosh, roll up your sleeves, get super excited, call in money, but not just to call in to have a lot of it. Be super intentional. Why are you calling in money? Call it in as much capacity as you want. And then you and money get to decide how to design a path of fulfillment. And that's when it gets exciting.
I love it. And we will dig deeper into that in a bit because I do think we need to explore the abundance-scarcity cycle as part of the context of the rest of the conversation. And I'm going to share a quote that you used from Michael Easter's book, Scarcity Brain, which is, we are not wired to enjoy things. We are wired to seek. So I think that starts the conversation about this abundance scarcity cycle. So could you explain the cycle?
100%. Yeah. And so the abundance scarcity cycle is, if you think of somatically and you tune into your body knows what it needs to stay alive. It needs another breath to stay alive and feed your body with oxygen. It needs to consume calories, which is a lot of the examples he uses in his book, The Scarcity Brain. We need to consume calories to keep our body alive. So our somatic system can get stuck in this cycle of I'm needing to seek more for survival. And we have evolved as a modern contemporary society to be past the seeking needs for survival because we're able to store food, right? We're able, most of us can breathe clean, fresh air. And so part of what we need to retrain our body is there's something wider and deeper than that abundance scarcity cycle where I'm trying to grasp on for more to be able to push the idea of scarcity away. Because that's the cycle we get stuck in. The abundance mindset, it's been kind of part of literature for many, many years, but a lot of people know it from the Stephen Covey book, The 7 Habits of Most Successful People, because he talks about the abundance mindset as a way to offset the scarcity mindset. And it does have a role, right? It's almost like saying, let's look at life from a glass half full versus half empty. But what it does is that it keeps us in this cycle of tension in our body, which doesn't allow our body to progress into a world where we can relax into the resources we have. So one very kind of somatic experience that I can, use for your listeners is that imagine taking one hand and just pushing scarcity away, and imagine using your other hand and grasping really hard to money. And notice that in both moments or instances, your body's in a tense moment. Now let go of that, release the hand that's grasping, release the hand that's pushing, and take a deep breath and allow yourself to be fulfilled by the ability to breathe and nourish yourself, to be satiated by something that was meaningful in your day to day. And that's how we start to expand outside of the abundance scarcity cycle that has a role into a bigger paradigm that I call the satiation paradigm, where meaning and fulfillment has an equal role in allowing us, in teaching our bodies how to experience and embody wealth.
I will admit that I regularly fantasize about this reality of having so much money that I don't have to think about money. I don't have to stress and worry if I have a certain amount of money. I wouldn't have to think about, oh my gosh, eggs are so expensive and airfare for a family of 5 is so off the charts now. There's all these things in my day-to-day life that cause stress and worry related to money. So I'm curious, is this a common fantasy that I have? And what are the pitfalls?
Oh my gosh, Emily, 9 out of 10 clients tell me that. At this point, I'm almost expecting it and I just smile. And then, you would appreciate this as a psychologist. I don't respond this way, but the way I want to respond is like, yeah, that sounds amazing, right? I want 10 husbands so that every day, at least one of them is in a good mood, right? And so it's the same thing where it's like, I want so many relationships that I'm bound to be happy in one of them. And so that's the same thing. There's a bypassing element. By wanting so much money, I don't have to think about it, because you're basically saying, I want so much of it, I don't want to deal with that relationship. And in psychology, we know that as bypassing. And I think the pitfall is you miss kind of the golden nuggets that lie in that relationship. And we were talking about it earlier. And my relationship with money, and we'll get to this because my favorite tool is the conversation with money tool. That's in chapter 3. And I introduce it really quickly in the book. But the first time I sat down and I had a conversation with money very quickly told me how much I was smothering it. And I had this unrealistic expectations on it. And I was like, oh my gosh, Emily, boyfriends have told me that before. It's my attachment style.
It's not just about the money.
No, I was like, oh my God, money is so right. It's not the first person in my life to tell me this. This is my relational style that I have to take responsibility for. I've lost friendships over this because I can be overly attached in a nice way. And so I think coming back to the pitfalls of wanting so much money, you don't have to think about it. You lose getting to know who you are in relationships. You lose getting to know money, right? You lose being able to have a relationship where money is actually an ally, a spiritual guide, and a friend. And it's a big component of being in this material world. And so there's so much to be gained in turning, squarely facing our shoulders and turning towards our relationship to money. And I want to say something really important too, is that one of the ways out of the abundance scarcity cycle is an exercise that I invite people to do in the book, which is doing your wealth mandala. Because what that does is that it gives you the ability to look at your life from the perspective of satisfying human needs. And we're very familiar with human needs from Maslow, funny enough, Maslow did not do a hierarchy, right? It was a corporate business that put it into a pyramid. He was talking more about just general needs.
Funny.
And so I put it, I know, isn't that funny? I was like, of course, that's what happened. And so there was an economist, Manfred Max Neef, who's put it in a matrix. I put it in a mandala. I like circles more than boxes. And one of the human needs is financial stability. And I feel like that's often the need that we spend a lot of our time in, necessarily so, right? And if that need is on fire, we have to address it. But when you start to raise the gaze and you're like, in addition to financial stability, some of my human needs include touch and leisure and curiosity, connection, belonging, participation, purpose, understanding, freedom, safety, physical health, right? And there's spaces for you to choose your own adventure, choose your own need. Then we're like, okay, where am I really feeling lack? Am I really feeling lack in my sliver of financial stability? Or am I feeling lack in touch, in connection, in purpose? And I'm scapegoating my sense of lack and scarcity on money because that's what society trains me to do.
Well, it deflects from attending to what you should be attending to truly fulfill those needs.
Exactly. And that's where we scapegoat monies. I feel like money is one of the biggest scapegoats in our society, partly to the piece of like, I want so much of it, I don't have to think about it. And it's more, we scapegoat it for our experience of unease. And then we do what we know how to do when we're feeling stressed about money is we either go try to make a lot more of it or we go and spend it, right? We're just like, we're trying to figure out a reactionary behavior to it, right? And so what I love about the wealth mandala, when you start to look at your different needs, Emily, and you're like, okay, and I tell people to do two things. One, look at the needs where you're actually really fulfilled in. That's really important. Where are you satisfied in your life? And then you look at the needs where you are feeling lack and scarcity. And you start to do kind of an inquiry into, okay, and the needs I'm feeling fulfilled in, what's working there? Right? Oh, check that out. I actually have ways to satisfy myself in these needs. Is there any way to bring some of those strategies to the needs that you're not feeling as fulfilled in? And I always tell people, Emily, when you satisfy your needs, you should be able to do that in monetary and non-monetary ways. So for example, if someone's like, I want to satisfy my needs for connection and I work really hard. And so the way I'm going to do it is just take friends out to dinner. And you're like, well, you're connecting with people, but you're spending money. And I tell people, how about you go on a hike? How about you take a walk? How about you have a phone call or send them a Marco Polo, which is, a video app, right? And so that's just as important because if we only use money to satisfy our needs, we recreate the dependency on it.
Yes. Okay. That makes sense. And actually, that's very clarifying. Because I think in my own journey with my relationship with money, I have very much a scarcity mindset of I need to store, save, and I can't spend anything on anything, and I've really worked on challenging that and softening that and being more expansive and seeing how money can actually help me live a more fulfilled life. So instead of worrying about how much dinner costs with my friend, knowing I do have enough and it's worth the time I'm spending with my friend. Or I finally started paying a monthly membership to a gym because exercise is really helpful for my aging body and my just state of mind. And it's worth that expense, even though in the past I would have said, I can't spend that money.
Yeah. So can we go there? Because it's just really, you're giving me such a great example, Emily. So thank you for being so honest with your own process, right? Your own experience around scarcity. What can happen though, and I come from a family of scarcity, so I know this quality very closely in my own lineage. But what can happen is that if you're used to scarcity in your body and you go to like, okay, I'm going to practice that I'm worth spending money on, or I'm deserving, because that's also what I hear a lot of. Sometimes we can go the other extreme and then we start to lose control and we're like, oh my gosh, what did I just start to do? My cash flow went from something I feel really comfortable with to like, I feel out of control. So what I would tell you, Emily, is that I use the wealth mandala in lieu of New Year's resolutions. And I do it with my clients, right? So at the beginning of the year, and Q1 meetings. They get the wealth mandala and they do it. Every year it's different. And I ask them, what are 2 needs that we want to focus on this year? So for example, in your case, maybe you're like, it's physical health and connection. I may be making those up, but you gave me examples of connecting with friends over dinner and going to the gym, right? And so if these are your 2 needs you're going to focus on at the beginning of the year, I would encourage you to make your list of what are my monetary strategies to channel resources to these needs, and what are my non-monetary strategies to channel resources to these needs. And you practice meaning and fulfillment and moving money in that direction. And what's good is that you create a filter, because what if, for example, you're like, but you know what? We could also take a trip, but it sounds like you're a family of 5 and that can get expensive. And you can be like, you know what? This year, my need for leisure, I'm going to practice that differently because I'm focusing on these 2. And so if you start to have that kind of focus of where you're starting to channel your resources as a way to practice embodying wealth, you also give your somatic experience time to catch up with that software update, instead of being like, I'm just going to throw a lot of money into trying to solve what has been an experience of scarcity. Does that make sense? Because it's really about how do you stay open to this new invitation to experience wealth differently. And so I would encourage you to take those 2 needs and take it a quarter at a time and be like, that's where I want to channel my resources to.
So I think that maybe I'm being too literal, like money can help me fulfill this need. But you're saying expand that. And I'm doing that to help counteract my impulse of don't spend money. Right? So I'm trying to balance out my automatic.
Exactly. But notice what ends up happening is that if the don't spend money, what you don't want to do is go to the opposite extreme, which is throw money at the problem. And that is why I'm saying the middle ground.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Yes.
The middle ground is say, okay, I want to turn towards physical health this year. These are the ways I'm going to do it with money, aka signing up for the gym. These are the ways I'm going to do it without money, aka, taking a walk with a friend every weekend. And notice when you start to take responsibility for bringing fulfillment and meaning to that need in ways that include and don't include money, you loosen the dependency on needing to use money to meet that need. And that's a key nuanced concept.
Well, and I think this connects to something I also want to explore, which is the concept of satiation and answering the question, how much money is enough?
Yeah.
And it's in the title of your book, The Power of Enough. Right?
Yeah.
So do you want to say more about that?
Of course. And can I keep using your example of your gym membership because it was such a good one?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And so, for example, the invitation I would give you, Emily, is that you made the commitment to subscribe to a gym this year, right? And so it's almost like I would love for you to sit down and be like, money, oh my goodness, guess what we did? We signed up for this gym. And I know it's hard to go, but every time I go, I'm going to take a minute after going to the gym to thank my body for the exercise it did. And oh my gosh, it always feels good after you're done. It's hard to get in there. So satiate the feeling of having moved your body and brought health to your body. And money, I'm also going to take a minute to thank you and me for making this contract on saying yes to this expenditure. And so do you notice how it's like, it becomes so much more fun to say. It brings alive the choices in how we design our use of money. And so that is how we start to satiate and really understand what are those areas that nourish us to the core. Because think of it, right? We know the difference between a meal that feels fulfilling and nourishing and a meal that was based on empty calories. We all know the difference. And we've all done it because sometimes we're rushing through life and like, I just have to have lunch, and you eat and you're like, what was that? Right? I feel crappy afterwards. And so the same thing, we do the same thing with our expenditures. We rush through life paying bills and putting things on auto pay so we don't have to think about it. And when we start to take the time to feel how are we satiated in our days, then we can start to really feel from the inside out that power of agency in our ability to design what brings me that sense of enoughness, what brings me that sense of embodied wealth. And so an easy way to do it, Emily, I tell people for 30 days, do a 30-day satiation challenge. Grab a journal, doesn't cost you anything. Do it on your app, on your phone. And for 30 days, at the end of the day, write down 3 things that satiated you. For me, meaningful conversations are one. So you will make my list tonight, Emily, having a meaningful conversation, right? If I'm able to have a conversation with my teenage daughter at breakfast, that always makes my list too, because those are sometimes fleeting moments. And when I get to go do my Zumba class, because it just fills so many of my buckets. And so for 30 days at the end of the day, write down those 3 things that satiated you. Literally swallow, consume that experience so your body starts to know what that feels like in your body, because then you start to compound moments of meaning, just like we compound interest in our portfolio. And as you compound moments of meaning, they grow and grow and grow, and you start to create a different energetic reference and somatic reference that you can make your way back to. So you do that for 30 days, then close your journal for a week, come back to it, read through it in one sitting, and start to see what are the patterns, what are the themes. Like if you read my journal compared to my husband, they're very different. I'm satisfied by meaningful conversation. My husband is satisfied by moments of quiet without people where he can dive into his books. And so we start to see what are those things that bring us satiation and satisfaction. And then how do we start to channel monetary and non-monetary resources there?
I think what you're getting at is we need to be more integrative overall with all of this. So when people are thinking about money, they think, well, this is how much I have. This is how much I'm investing. This is how much I'm saving. This is how much I'm spending. And there's typically some level of anxiety and angst about all those buckets. So let's say someone says, I want to save more. I want to invest more. What are you talking about with embodied wealth? How would you respond to that?
So again, I always tell people spreadsheets tell a story, and they're really important in terms of organization. Equally important is to know when to close the computer and step away from your spreadsheet. And that's the lesson I've had to learn over the years. And I can imagine you as well, as I see you nod your head.
Yes.
So what's really important, so think of it like it's again, in a healthy relationship with your spouse, there's a level of communication and organization of your life. So in a healthy relationship with money, there's a level of communication and organization of your life. So it really is important to know if I'm turning towards understanding money as a resource, I need to know how much is coming in, how much is going out, what are my savings goals? And so when it comes to how much is coming in, right? If you're a W-2, you have a paycheck, those are the dollars that are coming in. If you're an entrepreneur, it can be cyclical. So you may have to look at kind of wider patterns, but you generally can have a sense of what's coming in. Then you look backwards and you say, what are those fixed expenditures? They're often rent, mortgage, utility bills, school, gas, car payments, insurance payments, etc. You work backwards and then you get the fixed. And then there's discretionary or variables that usually we use for some things that fluctuate, right? Our food, dining out, our charitable gifting. If you're going to do memberships or subscriptions to things, entertainment. And so when it comes to that discretionary amount, what's important is, so work backwards into what that discretionary amount is. And then I tell people, step away from that number for a moment. Go back to your wealth mandala and say, what are the needs that I want to highlight right now? If it's the need for physical health and connection, take those needs. And again, you've done already the exercise of writing out, how do I want to satisfy those needs in monetary, non-monetary ways? You bring that back to your spreadsheet and you say, the focus for this year are these 2 needs. This is how much extra discretionary money I have. So how am I going to consciously, respectfully, and deliberately plan for this year to channel those resources towards meeting these needs, right? And what's really important, Emily, is that it doesn't mean you don't channel resources towards other needs. It means you channel resources that are money to other needs, right? You still can continue to practice connection. You still continue to practice purpose or whatever the other needs that are important to you, but you get creative and potentially they're not done in monetary ways. So do you see that? Is money, we do work within the parameters. I wouldn't say constraints, but the parameters of what resources you have when it comes to monetary resources. But the world of resources, again, you are psychologists. We talk about resourcing in so many ways. And so we need to make sure that we don't scapegoat not being able to put money towards meeting a need to say, I can't meet that need, because that is what keeps us in the scarcity loop.
Right.
And that is what keeps us in an unhealthy, codependent relationship with money.
I want to touch on how talking about money is fairly taboo.
Yeah.
We don't really share our financial situations or talk about, I don't feel like I have enough money to do that, right? It causes tension. So I want to hear from you what you think is problematic about this taboo nature of talking about money.
And what's problematic about it is that we don't normalize this relationship. And so it becomes something that is really secretive. And when something's so secretive, sometimes we get stuck in these spirals of shame. Am I doing it right? Am I the only one who feels this way? And it becomes kind of this spiral of unworthiness that doesn't get us anywhere. And so a big piece of why I wrote the book, Emily, is to give people an entry point into talking about money in ways that doesn't necessarily require you to talk about how much you make, how much you spend, how much you earn, how much you gift. Because that's what starts to feel uncomfortable. We have judgments about that, right? Did you invest in that company? But that company is evil. Did you do this, right? Why didn't you break? Why didn't you make that income goal that you had for yourself? And so, and I think that that's maybe a next generation of a book of how do we actually talk about numbers. But what I wanted to do, and especially with the mini moments where I ask reflective questions throughout the whole book, is pick a mini moment that really resonates for you, and then call a friend or have a group and say, hey, let's talk about this question, right? It could be, what's our earliest memory of money, right? Or what do we know about money in our lineage? And you can make the agreement to not talk about numbers if that creates a safe container, but we can start to talk about our relationship to money. And that will start to release so much power that is right now, I feel like, kind of stored in our hidden secret stories about money that we don't have full access to. And so I think that we can create almost like a radical new relationship and transformation in our collective relationship to money if we start to access our stories and make a collective agreement. Hey, we don't want to carry shame there, right? It's like, you know, I think of, for growing up when I did, it's just like, just everything around gender and being able to be a successful woman in my field, right? And it's just like, the more I talk to other female financial advisors and we say, we can do it differently, then it becomes less this, I feel isolated on an island, feeling like I'm a fish out of water. And so the more we start to talk with each other, and the reality is that everyone deals with money. And so find a doorway in, find a question that resonates with you. Everyone deals with money. I know you do a lot of interviews with people around parenting. And that's my other kind of passion is, as parents, we have not just a responsibility, but the ability to teach our kids a new way, right? I get asked that question a lot at book events or at talks is, what do I'm struggling with my own relationship with money. What do I teach my teens? And so what I tell people is that be honest with your teen and say, hey, money is a complex, field that we navigate as humans, right? It's a place that we need to learn how to adult. And it can be tricky, much like sex can be tricky and drinking can be tricky and social media can be tricky. But guess what? There are healthy ways in, and I'm committed to learning those healthy patterns in myself. And I'm committed to teaching healthy patterns that you can also learn. And so let's roll up our sleeves and address our questions around financial literacy. And let's roll up our sleeves and address our questions around our habits, patterns, behaviors on how we experience wealth. And so when you're honest with your family and your kids and you'd be like, hey, let's explore this together, teens are often like, yeah, they're drawn to money because they see money at a much more, they're drawn to money. But think about it. I mean, think of a kid. Let's not even go to teens. Let's think of a kid, a new toy. Yeah. They're like, oh my goodness, this is like something new to explore about the material world. And that for me, Emily, is so key, because if we go back to the beginner's eye mentality that a child has, they just come at the world with curiosity to explore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's not the meaning attached to it.
No. And so if you could do that with money, like, oh my gosh, money, we're going to go explore this and we're going to go explore that, right? It doesn't matter the amount. You give a kid $2 and they're like, whoa, let's go just do something with those $2. As adults, we attach value to like, oh, well, what's $2 going to buy me? It's actually still going to buy you a pack of stickers. So go have fun with stickers, right? And so there's a playfulness that we can bring back to it. And so I think as parents, we have the responsibility to protect the natural curiosity and creativity that we come into the world as we navigate the material world. That's really important.
Well, I think along with that is true across all realms of parenting, is the importance of that self-awareness about your relationship with money and what might be triggered. So when my kids seem either ungrateful for something material, or I feel like they're demanding too much and not thinking about the value of how to spend money, I get reactive. And that is because of how I grew up, where we were solidly middle class. We had what we needed. But there was a narrative in my family of being very careful with how we spent our money. And so I get reactive to certain things. And then I am also not wanting to transmit my money anxiety to my kids. I want them to have a healthier relationship with money than I've had. I don't want to be putting this baggage on them like I feel like I've ended up carrying for myself.
So that's beautiful, right? I get chills as you describe that, because part of it is that coming back to your inner child, Emily, and being like, okay, you know, we were careful with money. We had what we needed, but where was the play? And so one experiment that you could do with yourself and with your kids to be like, you know what, kids, we're all going to get, we're not going to call it an allowance, but we're going to get $20 a month to play with. And it's no judgment zone. No one gets to decide where your $20 goes, but we get to participate and share what we did with it. And find within your family spending plan, what's the number that works? Is it $20? Is it $10? Is it $5? But everyone gets that same amount, and do the experiment for 6 months and be like, what did people play? Like, what did they spend on in a playful way? And one, you'll start to learn more about your kids. Two, you'll start to heal your inner child who wasn't given that permission to play and to get to know herself because it was too careful. It's almost like, again, think of it from food perspective. We were potentially counting calories as a family that we didn't get to, from time to time, take the bite of something like luscious. It could have been something super sweet that just like, you know, burst your taste buds. It could have been something savory, but that ability as a child to explore and to have resources to explore with is something that we all need in some capacity. And so, you know, again, the dollar amount doesn't matter. It could be $1. And so go to your family spending plan and decide what that is. But notice if you start to bring that element of play back in, then something starts to transform in how you experience it. And you're giving yourself permission and your kids permission to enliven your relationship to money. And you just do that for 6 months and see what starts to change.
I'm picturing, as you're talking about this, where we started, which was the idea of unclenching, you know, like loosening the grip, dropping the holding on and pushing away and relaxing into money. And so even having, it's sort of a corrective experience in some ways of money that's play and fun and not attached to anything scary and serious.
Exactly. And do it with the number, the amount where you don't start to close. That's really important, right? I can't tell you.
Right.
I've had so many teachers who are like, if you start to close, then you've gone too far, right? And that's really important because a lot of people are like, oh, I feel scarcity and I'm going to solve scarcity by throwing spaghetti at the wall and trying on abundance. And we're like, oh, that didn't feel good,
right?
right? We feel out of control. And so it's like, no.
Yeah.
And so again, come back. So the more we design our way there, the more we feel, I don't want to say in control, but in agency. And so again, go to your wealth mandala, choose 2 needs to work on, write your monetary and non-monetary strategies and be like, okay, now let me go back to the spreadsheet because the spreadsheet is important. Say, okay, I have about $100 of discretionary dollars a month. And I'm going to channel it towards these 2 needs. Every month you get to be creative on what that looks like. And so do you notice how we can work within the parameters of what we have? We can bring creativity, we can bring design, we can bring agency, and hopefully joy.
And that completely redirects the narrative about money. It's not about, do I have enough? Which is essentially what we're trying to get away from. Is it's not a question of enough. It's a question of how am I using this tool and resource as a one way of experiencing meaning and fulfillment.
Exactly. Because the goal, right? The goal isn't that golden age of retirement where we retire from the world, right? That's actually a very nuanced concept, retirement. It got invented 1935 with the onset of Social Security. So it's only 100 years old within thousands of years of humanity. And so let's come back to, what do our ancestors know? They do know how to live in meaning and fulfillment. It may look different than what we experienced, but let's bring that more to the forefront of our framework, of our theory, of our spoken language around economics, wealth, and finances, and recognize that we have the power to practice enough every single day of our life with what we have disposal as monetary resources, not non-monetary resources. And for me, the power of enough, Emily, are those embodied moments of satiation where you start to digest moments of meaning or release moments of meaning, where wealth is connected to well-being, regardless of your external circumstance. That's the power you have the ability to generate.
Right. And that's where the sense of agency comes in, and that we are in charge of our experience and fulfillment of our lives. And you give so many great tools to find our way there.
Yeah. And for me, that's kind of like the radical revolution that I hope I can contribute to, is that the more we take that power back on our relationship to money, what is the ripple effect that that's going to have in the world? May I live long enough to see it, but how does that then ripple out into our policies, into, our elected officials? So all the things that we see are wrong in the world. Let's start by embracing a relationship that's pivotal to how we define power, and let's do it differently.
That is the perfect place to end, I think. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for creating this book, for bringing your wisdom and just entirely fresh and transformational perspective about money into the world. I think this will make people's lives better. And I think that's all of our goals as authors, is to help people have a meaningful change in their lives. So thank you. Where can people find you?
What I was first going to say, Emily, is thank you for having me, because I agree 100%. This is my gift to the world, right? Is if I can just drop a nugget of nuance when it comes to their relationship to money, then my job is done. And it can be through the book. It could be listening to this really important conversation and podcast that you all have. But so thank you for that. People can find me at my website. It's www.elizabethhusserl.com. Husserl is HUSSERL.com. And on that website, there's a ton of resources that I speak about in the book that people can download for free. You can have a PDF to the wealth mandala. You can have a PDF to the writing your money story exercises. I'll continue to add resources there, but it's a great place to look about events that are coming up, workshops that we're going to be offered, resources, etc. And I'm also on Instagram. So at Elizabeth Husserl, you can find me there for more fun posts.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for coming on Psychologists Off the Clock.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.